In a move that stunned Washington insiders, rattled Pentagon officials, and left seasoned generals privately questioning the very purpose of their sudden gathering, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered a highly choreographed speech at Quantico that was billed as a rallying cry for American military greatness, but instead became a lightning rod of controversy, division, and confusion as hundreds of the nation's top officers, many of whom were rushed to Virginia with minimal notice, sat through what numerous defense officials later described as a partisan spectacle that felt more like a campaign rally than a strategic briefing, more like a performance stage for political optics than an operational meeting focused on real threats, and more like a loyalty test thinly veiled in patriotic language than an actual roadmap for U.S. defense strategy. And the backlash has been fierce, direct, and unrelenting, with anonymous officials across the Department of Defense admitting that they left the event asking why it had been held at all, why precious resources had been wasted, and why the administration was risking so much credibility both at home and abroad, for what they viewed as little more than a dramatic photo opportunity. As President Donald Trump used the stage to justify potential deployments of U.S. troops inside American cities, and Hegseth hammered home retrograde fitness standards and rhetoric aimed at projecting toughness, even going so far as to mock what he called fat generals, and dismiss long-standing rules of engagement designed to protect civilian lives as stupid, a remark that immediately sparked concern among lawmakers, human rights advocates, and many in uniform who know those rules exist not as a form of weakness but as a shield of legitimacy that separates the U.S. military from authoritarian forces that wage war with no regard for innocent lives. And yet, in front of a hall full of decorated officers sworn to uphold the Constitution, the Defense Secretary framed the speech as an end to what he and Trump described as an era of political correctness in the ranks, rebranding the Pentagon as the Department of War and promising that the so-called war on warriors was over, a declaration that might have resonated with some hardline supporters, but left many seasoned commanders deeply unsettled, frustrated, and even alarmed at the short-sightedness of the message, especially as the nation teetered on the brink of a government shutdown, and military planners were grappling with escalating tensions with Russia and China, both of whom could only view the sight of America's entire senior leadership gathered in one publicly known location as a strategic vulnerability that no prudent defense institution should ever permit. And indeed, multiple current and former officials labeled the gathering not only a distraction, but an inexcusable strategic risk, noting that in wartime conditions, adversaries would dream of knowing exactly where to find the chain of command in such concentrated form. And so rather than building strength, the spectacle projected disorganization, misplaced priorities, and political theater masquerading as military readiness. And while Trump instructed attendees to just have a good time, the stakes were anything but trivial, with lawmakers on Capitol Hill erupting in bipartisan criticism, Democrats leading the charge with Rep. Pat Ryan, a combat veteran of Iraq, calling the mere suggestion of deploying troops against U.S. citizens unconstitutional, unprecedented, and un-American, demanding that every freedom-loving American, regardless of party, speak out, while Rep. Chrissy Holohan doubled down on her call for Hegseth to resign, saying his views erode military readiness, lethality, and credibility, and Senator Mazie Hirono excoriated the meeting as vanity-driven chest-thumping that undermined real national security priorities, even as allies like Senator Tommy Tuberville praised it as a bold return to old-school warfighter ethos, revealing the deep partisan fault lines running through every aspect of the conversation, fault lines that echo far beyond Quantico into debates about the future of civil-military relations, the line between political loyalty and constitutional duty, and the very identity of the armed forces in a polarized era. And amid this storm of reactions, what stood out most was the quiet contempt among career officers, many of whom admitted that during the speech, they busied themselves with back-of-the-envelope calculations of how much the production must have cost taxpayers, others joking on internal chats that ChatGPT could help them tally the waste, while others flatly chose not to watch, averting their eyes out of frustration and fatigue. Because to them, time spent in a theater listening to partisan soundbites was time not spent preparing troops, training forces, or addressing genuine threats from adversaries abroad. And in their view, those missed hours represented more than inconvenience. They represented risk, because every day that the military is distracted by domestic politics is a day adversaries like Beijing or Moscow can exploit, a day of lost readiness, a day of diminished focus, and those realities cut deeper than any rhetorical flourish about warrior ethos. And so the question that now lingers over Washington is not simply whether Hegseth's speech landed with its audience, but whether it permanently damaged his credibility with the very people he is supposed to lead, whether it eroded trust between the brass and civilian leadership, and whether the message that the administration wanted to project, strength, discipline, unity, actually backfired by revealing cracks, divisions, and doubts that adversaries will be all too eager to exploit. And in that sense, the Quantico gathering may go down not as a moment of rallying, but as a moment of reckoning, where America's most seasoned defenders of the Constitution were forced to confront the uncomfortable collision of politics and the profession of arms. And while the Pentagon's public statement insisted that the event boosted morale and cemented a return to tradition, behind closed doors, the whispers tell a different story, one of officers quietly tallying costs, weighing risks, and concluding that the most dangerous battlefield America may face is not in the South China Sea, not in Eastern Europe, not even in cyberspace, but within the blurred boundaries of its own institutions, where loyalty to ideals and loyalty to individuals are being tested in real time, and where every misstep carries consequences that reverberate far beyond the walls of Quantico into the global perception of American power, credibility, and purpose. And that is why this speech, far from being a simple rallying cry, has become a defining flashpoint, forcing the nation to confront hard truths about leadership, accountability, and the delicate balance between projecting strength and preserving constitutional integrity. A balance that, if lost, threatens to do more damage than any foreign adversary could dream of achieving.